How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Zayin, Daf 17 of Masechta Ksubis, friends. Daf Yud Zayin is an interesting daf. We talk about, I don't know, I guess the first sort of lines of the daf are sort of well known, different things that happen at a wedding, I guess. And then we get back to Hapesha, also Hapesha Hitir, at the end of the daf, which is also just an interesting sugya in my opinion. So friends, let's jump in over here. On Daf Tez Zayin Amud Beis, where are we? I think all the way at the bottom. I sure hope so. Yeah, Tez Zayin Amud Beis, all the way at the bottom. Toner Rabbanon, the rabbis taught Ketzim Raktim Lifnei Akale. How do you dance before the bride? So interesting. Rashi says Ketzim Raktim Ma Omrim Lefaneo. What do we say before her? All right. Beis Shammai Omrim Kale K'moshi. So Beis Shammai says, well, we got to be honest. If Rashi says Lefi Yofia b'chashivusa mekalsanu, so we praise her relative to her beauty and her status. Beisila says, look, every single bride, no matter what, is nova chasuda, is beautiful and has a sort of kindness. Chut shel chesed, says Rashi, chut shel chesed moshu choleo, has a string of kindness, good vibes. Okay. So Beis Shammai says, Beisil, how can you just always say that every single bride is kalanoa v'chasuda? So sumo, what if she was lame or blind? Omrim lo kalanoa v'chasuda. What, in that case, you're going to say kalanoa v'chasuda? And I guess Beis Shammai didn't feel that would be an appropriate description. Yet the Torah says, Midvar sheker tircha. You have to stay away from falsehood. Beisil responds to Beis Shammai, according to you, mishalokach mekachra. A fellow made a bad purchase, min ashuk, from the market. Yishabchenu be'enav or yiganenu be'enav. Should, somebody purchased something shver from the market. So should you say, okay, don't worry, it was, it looks good? Or should you say, wow, you're such an idiot, you bought the wrong thing? So Beisil's opinion is that, look, a fellow bought the wrong thing, but don't drive him crazy. Say, don't worry about it, you got something good. From here the Chacham say, a fellow should always be sort of good vibes with the people. Do you hear that? A fellow should always strive to have good vibes with the people. Okay, there you have it. A fellow should strive to have good vibes with the people. Kelser Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said, Hochimashu kamikalos marava. This is what they sing before a bride in Eretz Yisrael, lo kav, lo srak, lo pirchos, not different kinds of makeup or hairdos, v'ayla schen, and nonetheless, she has favor. Ki samchu rabbanon leReb Zera, when the rabbis gave smicha, ordained as a rabbi, Reb Zera, shoru le'achi, they sang to him in the following, lo kav, lo srak, lo pirchos, not all sorts of makeups and hairdos, v'ayla schen, and still, I guess she has favor, but I guess it was a reference to Reb Zera. I don't know, I guess he was a good guy. When the rabbis ordained Reb Ami and Reb Asi, they sang the following, everybody like this one and everybody like that. I imagine it's referring to everybody like Reb Ami, everybody like Reb Asi. Smo chulana, ordain for us as rabbis. Lo sisim chulana, lo min sarmisin, don't ordain as rabbis, not distorters. V'lo sarmitin, and not rags. Ve'amrila lo chamisin, and some say not withholders. V'lo tormisin, and not lupines. Don't ordain lupines. Okay. Rabbi Abahu ki ava osam v'msifta levei Kesar, when Rabbi Abahu would come from the Beis HaMedrash to the house of the Caesar, Rabbi Abahu was very wealthy and I think very well connected. So when you would go from the Beis HaMedrash to the Caesar, Nafkam Hosa Devei Kesar, so the matrons of the Caesar would come out la'ape to greet Rabbi Abahu. And and they would sing Hachi in the following way: Rav da Ame Umadbana de Umse, the leader of his nation, Putzina de Nahora, the great light, Brich Masich L'Shlam, blessed years are coming in peace. Alright, sounds nice. Amru Olav Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi, they said about the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, Shayanotel Bad Shal Hodos, that he would chaparain a branch of a myrtle, a Hodos branch, Umrak Lifnei Akala, and then dance before the bride. V'omer, and he would say, Kalanoe v'chasuda, that the bride is beautiful and has a sort of chut shel chesed, a string of kindness upon her. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak Meraket Atlos, Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak would juggle. Reb Zera, so Reb Zera said when witnessing Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, or I guess about Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Kamachsif la'asava. I'm shtickle tired, I guess. Kamachsif la'asava, that Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak is embarrassing us. Kinoch nafshe, and nonetheless, when Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak passed away, Ifsik amuda denura bendide l'chuli alma, there was a pillar of fire that separated between him and the rest of the people. Ugmire, and we learned lo afsik amuda denura elo ilechad bedara iletre bedara, that it is rare that this happens, that there is a pillar of fire separating between a corpse and the people. It only happens once or twice in a generation, and it happened to Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, who would juggle at weddings. Reb Zera, says Reb Zera, Ahanile, oh gosh, how many of you just yawned now because of me? Reb Zera, says Reb Zera, Ahanile shutise l'sava, that Reb Zera says, well, I guess his branch worked out for him. Some say his silliness ended up working out for him. Some say his opinion ended up working out for him. Rav Acha would put the bride on his shoulders, umraket, and dance. So the rabbi said, wow, Rav Acha, can we do it too? He said to them, look, if the bride is similar in your eyes to just like a beam, that there's no sort of desire there for her, well then okay, Beseder, if you want to be Mesameh, Chosim V'Kal, and put it on your shoulders, and there's absolutely no sort of nothing, even a speck of anything inappropriate there, so Beseder. Lo, but if you can't be sure of that, so then no way. Amr Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amr Yonason, Mutul Istaka b'fnei Kala Kol Shiva, that it's permitted to look at the face of the bride for all 7 days after the wedding. Excuse me. So that she will be beloved upon her husband. Right? Meaning if her husband sees that the people are looking at his wife, so he'll be like, wow, she's pretty awesome. But nonetheless, the halacha is not like Rishon bar Nachmani and Rabbi Yonason, i.e., don't stare at the bride when she just got married for the first week. Friends, I apologize for the yawning. The truth is, I'm not really that tired, but I am. You know what I mean? Like, my brain is completely fine, but I guess I'm tired. I'm like jet lagged, and like I'm not even like trying to beat it or anything. I'm just like, I don't really care, so I'm just like sleeping weird hours. I mean, I already sleep weird hours, but weirder hours. If you have like a wedding procession, and then you have like a funeral procession, and they're about to like sort of interact with one another, so you sort of move the funeral procession in a different direction rather than to detour the wedding procession. Now, both a funeral procession and a wedding procession, you would detour, from in front of the king's procession. They said about King Agrippas, friends, of course, I live right next to Agrippa Street in Yerushalayim. That Agrippas the king, he detoured because there was a wedding party coming, so he detoured, even though really the wedding is supposed to detour on account of the king, but Agrippas the king Dafka detoured because there was a wedding procession, and the rabbis praised Agrippas that he was such a kavaldige fellow that even though he didn't need to get out of the way, he did. Shibchu, what do you mean that the rabbis praised Agrippas, implying that Hitaka did a good thing by detouring? But doesn't Rav Ashi say that even according to the opinion who says that the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin, right, sort of a very important person in the Jewish community, even if he wants to sort of pass up on his honor, so that's okay. But Melech Shemach al Kvodo ain't Kvodo Machul. But a king is unable to pass up on his honor. There are certain objective standards that we have to apply to a king so that he will always be sort of, a step above. He's always going to be treated as the king. And therefore, he's unable to just say, like, no, don't worry about my honor. He's not allowed to. Part of being the king is that he must always be honored. And therefore, how can he just say, no, it's cool, I'll get out of the way for this wedding procession? The king always needs to sort of be the one who moves forward, and it has to be that the wedding procession will move out of his way. That's just sort of necessary in order to give the king the proper respect that is deserving of a king. The pasuk says, "Som tosim alecha melech," that you shall surely place upon yourself a king. Shetei imosu alecha, that his fear shall be upon you, and therefore, you should always sort of be on his own kind of honorable place, and he can't just pass on that. So Parshas Doachim Avois. So the Gemara says, well, with Agrippas, when he got out of the way, it's because it was by a fork in the road. So he just chose to take the other way. It wasn't obvious that he was getting out of that he was detouring on account of the wedding procession. Rather, it was convenient for him to just go the other way, and that way he can detour from the wedding procession while also not sort of deferring his honor. Now, is it raining? Wow, it's pouring outside. That's one thing about Teaneck, New Jersey. I think it rains a lot in the summer. That's what I recall from last summer. I think it rains a lot. Yeah, I don't know, man. Tana Rabbanon, the rabbis Taka taught that that if a fellow is studying Torah, he stops studying Torah in order to go to a funeral or to a wedding. They said about Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, that he would stop learning in order to attend a funeral or a wedding. When do we say this? When the funeral or the wedding doesn't have enough participants. But if they have what they need, then we would not stop learning and we would continue learning. What exactly would be the necessary needs for a funeral? 12,000 men and an additional 6,000 sort of people that would announce, like, hey, come and honor the nifter. And some say, Taka, it was 12,000 men, and of those 12,000, 6,000 are announcing and trying to grab people to come and join the procession. Ula says that if there are enough people to fill up the sort of the distance from Avula to Sichra, Rav Sheishes v'item Rav Yochanan Omar Netilosa Kinisinosa, that taking away the soul is like the giving of the soul. Manisinosa b'shishim. Taking away of the Torah, I guess, is like taking away Torah from this fellow, that when he passes away, he can no longer study Torah. So taking away the Torah from this fellow, i.e., when a fellow passes away, it's like when the Torah is given. Ma nisinosa b'shishim ribo af netilosa b'shishim ribo. Just like there were 600,000 people when the Torah was given, so also when the Torah is taken away from a fellow, at a fellow's funeral, there should be 600,000 people. Now this number of 600,000 is for somebody who learned Tanakh, and who learned Mishnayos and Gemaras and all that stuff. Somebody who taught other people, well, then it doesn't stop at 600,000. There's actually there's actually no limit if he taught other people. I guess Tani is Davka Mishnah. I guess it doesn't mention anything about Gemara, but okay, so a fellow who learned, so then, fine, so then, as long as there's less than 600,000 people, you should stop your studies in order to attend the funeral. But if it's a fellow who not just learned but also taught, well, then there actually is no measure to how large that funeral can be. So the Mishnah had said that if there are witnesses that on her wedding day she went out with this hinuma, and also that her hair was uncovered and let down, so we said in these cases, then that means that she's a besula. So my hinuma, what exactly is this hinuma? Surchav bar papa mishmei Zeiri Omar. So it says Surchav bar papa in the name of Zeiri, Tanura de Asa, a canopy of hadassim, a canopy of myrtle. Alright, so she went out in some kind of a canopy of myrtle. Rabbi Yochanan Omer, Krisa de Menamna ba kalasa. Rabbi Yochanan says some kind of a veil that sort of covers her eyes and makes her sleepy. If she went out in this hinuma, which is either a canopy of hadassim or some kind of a veil, well, then that means that she is a besula. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer Chulei. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says that if they gave out different kinds of roasted grains, then that means that she was a besula. Tana b'Yehuda Raya. So we say, okay, so in Eretz Yisrael, in Judah, so this is a sign that she is a besula. But Bavel Mai, what would they do in Bavel? Right? We had given things in our Mishnah. For example, if she went out with this hinuma or with her hair let down, or they gave out these grains, so that was sort of a proof in Yehuda that she is a besula. Bavel Mai. What about in Bavel? What would they do for the besulas? So Amar Rab Darduge de Mishcha Aresha de Rabbanon. Rab says that in Bavel what they would do is they would pour oil on the heads of the rabbis. If a besula gets married, the women would pour oil on the heads of the rabbis and rub it into their heads. Amar Papa Labai says, Papa Labai Mishcha de Chafifusa Ka Amar Mar. What? So you're talking about that they would rub the oil into their head like shampoo? Amale Yasma. So Abai says to her Papa, the orphan, Rashi says Yosum Minag Anoig, a fellow who sort of is he's unaware of the minhagim. But I believe that we saw a Gemara in Yevamis where it says that I think Abai basically killed Rav Papa's parents because Rav Papa came from a wealthy house that he was able to study or something. Anyways, Lo Abdullah Imcha Daduge Mishcha Aresha der Abonim B'Shas Maise. Rav Papa, didn't your mother pour oil on the rabbis' heads when you got married? Kiyodahu Merabanon. It's like a certain, rabbis or a certain rabbi. The Asik Le'Livrei Bei Rabbi Bar Ula, that he was trying to make a shidduch by the household of Rabbi Bar Ula. V'amila Rabbi Bar Ula Yasik Le'Livrei Bei Ha'u Merabanon. Or some say it was Taka Rabbi Bar Ula who was trying to make a shidduch by a certain rabbi. V'dardig Mishcha Aresha the Rabbanon B'Shas Maise. And they poured oil on the heads of the rabbis at the time, and they rubbed it into the heads. And the fact that they were pouring oil on the rabbis' heads and rubbing it in, so then Memele she was a besula. Okie dokie. Amalta Mai. So now, what's the sign that she's an almona? So Tani Rav Yosef Amalta Leisla Kisne. Well, that a widow. By a widow, they did not have these dried out grains. So, from the fact that the dried out grains were not there, so Mamela, that means that she's a widow and almona, not a besula. Alright, what do you want me to tell you? Oh, so now we get back to our Mishnah. For the sake of our Mishnah, right? We had said at the end of our Mishnah, yesterday, that the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua is, HaPesha also, HaPesha Hitir, that if Reuven says to Shimon, I bought a field from your father, this father belonged, what? If Reuven says to Shimon, this field that we're looking at once belonged to your father, but I purchased it from him, so Reuven is believed. But if witnesses came and said, wait, Reuven, what's the deal with this field? It's not yours, it was Shimon's father. And he says, yeah, but I bought it from Shimon's father, then he is not believed. So now says the Gemara, V'lesni moda Rabbi Yoshua. Why don't we say that Rabbi Yeshua admits, Ba'omer lachavero, that when Reuven says to Shimon, that this field was yours. Forget about his father. This field was yours. And I purchased it from you. Why do we have to get the father involved? Well, because what's the next part? The next part is that that if witnesses came and said that the field, right, so Reuven didn't instigate it, rather witnesses instigated it by saying, Reuven, what's your relationship with this field? It was Shimon's father's. And Reuven says, yeah, I bought it from Shimon's father, although the Gemara is saying, wait, meaning if witnesses were to come and say that the field belonged to Shimon, and Reuven were to say, yeah, but I purchased it from Shimon, he would not be, Reuven would not be believed. Heichidami. Now, what would be the case, right? Meaning, so we're asking, how come we have to frame this as Reuven purchasing the field from Shimon's father? Why don't we just do it from the perspective of Shimon? Reuven says to Shimon, this field was yours, but I purchased it from you. So why can't we say that? So we say, well, because the Mishnah then would have to continue and say that, but if witnesses came and said that this field belongs to Shimon, and Reuven says, yeah, but I bought it from Shimon, so then we do not believe Reuven. Well, I don't understand. Why would the Mishnah have to say that? Hey, Chidami, what's the case? If Reuven had already consumed from the field for the requisite 3 years, right? There's a halacha that if, Reuven were to be on this field for 3 years and eating the fruits and treating it as if it's his, and Shimon never said anything to him, so then we can assume, why didn't Shimon say anything to him? Because it's not Shimon's, it's Reuven's. Reuven's been on this field for 3 years, eating the fruits, certainly, acting in every way as though it's his, and Shimon never said anything. So, if Reuven were to have been on the field for these 3 years, consuming the fruits, and Shimon never said anything, well then, Memele, it would belong to Reuven. So then what does it mean that, right, so, in the event that witnesses came and said that the field belongs to Shimon, and Reuven says, yeah, but I bought it from Shimon. Well, if Reuven had already been on the field consuming the fruits for 3 years and Shimon never said anything, so it should belong to Reuven. Amai lo mehemen, why is Reuven not believed? He should be believed. He has a chazaka. And if Reuven did not eat it for the requisite 3 years in order to make a chazaka, pshita de lo mehemen, obviously he's not going to be believed. So, because it would be obvious, right, in the event that we're talking about Shimon himself, well then in the Sefer, when it says that if witnesses came and said that the field belongs to Shimon, and Reuven says, yeah, but I bought it from Shimon, he's not believed, well, it wouldn't make sense if we're talking about Shimon himself as opposed to his father, because if we're talking about where Reuven has been on the field for 3 years already, well then it should belong to Reuven. And if he has not yet been on the field, if he has not been on the field for 3 years, If Reuven has been on the field already for 3 years, then it should belong to Reuven. If he has not been on the field for 3 years, then it should not belong to Reuven. But Ihachi Gabe Aviv Nami. But I don't understand why saying that it's Shimon's, why bring Shimon's father into the question? Why does that help at all? If Reuven had already been on the field for the 3 years in order to make a chazaka, why is he not believed? He should be believed. And if Reuven has not been on the field for 3 years, certainly Reuven would not be believed because he hasn't been there for 3 years. So why should there be any difference between if the claim is with Shimon or Shimon's father? So B'Shlomo Gabi Oviv Mishkachas La, well, I can understand what the chiddush is when it has to deal with Shimon's father. For example, if Reuven ate from the field for 2 years when the father was alive, right? So Shimon was still alive. Shimon's father was still alive. Reuven was eating the fruits of the field for 2 years. Now he has to do it for 3 years. Shimon's father then died. And then Reuven's 3rd year eating from the fruits to make the chazaka was after Shimon's father's death, and Shimon is a kohen. That we cannot make a chazaka with the property of a kohen, and that is the chiddush, right? So if we're saying that we're talking about Shimon's father, so then the chiddush is that if witnesses come and say that the field belonged to Shimon's father, and Reuven says, yeah, but he bought it from Shimon's father. And he was saying that we don't believe Reuven. And the Chiddush is that even though Reuven has been on the field for 3 years, 2 of them were during the lifetime of Shimon's father. The 3rd year was after Shimon's father died, and Shimon is a Katan. And what we're saying is that even though Reuven has been on the field for 3 years, because Shimon is a Katan, therefore Reuven does not make a chazaka, right? It's like Rav Huna says in Machzikim b'nichsei Katan that you can't make a chazaka on the property of a minor, afilu higdil, even once he gets older. Even once he gets older, if Reuven is still there for another 3 years, still it doesn't help if Shimon inherited it as a minor. Rav Huna masnisin osel hashminun. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand. What's the point of Rav Huna? Meaning, if we're saying that our Mishnah, which says that Reuven says to Shimon that the field belonged to his father, but then Reuven bought it from him, or from the father, or if witnesses come and say that the field belonged to Shimon's father, and then Reuven says that he purchased it from Shimon's father, and we're saying what's the Chiddush, right? We're saying the only way to be able to understand this Mishnah is where Reuven ate from the field, right? 2 years of the Chazakah were when Shimon's father was alive, and the 3rd year was when Shimon's father had already died and Shimon is a minor, right? Because if Reuven ate for 3 years while Shimon's father was alive, so then it would just be a chazakah, we should believe him. And if it was less than 3 years, then certainly we would not believe Reuven. Right? I don't know if I'm confusing Reuven and Shimon, but if Reuven was on the field for 3 years while Shimon's father was alive, so certainly he should have a chazakah. If he wasn't there for 3 years, certainly he should not have a chazakah. But the only way to understand the Mishnah and the Chiddush in the Mishnah is to say that the witnesses are coming and saying that the field belonged to Shimon's father, and Reuven had eaten from the field for 2 years while Shimon's father was alive, and the 3rd year when Shimon's father was dead, and Shimon is a minor, so that's the only way to be able to understand the Chiddush of the Mishnah, in which case, what is Rav Huna coming to teach us if he's basically explaining the Mishnah for us? It's not a big, thanks Rav Huna for explaining a Mishnah, but at the end of the day, it's just a Mishnah, right? Meaning Rav Huna masnisin also lashminin. Was Rav Huna just teaching us a Mishnah? Rav Huna diyuka de masnisin kamer. Well, one way to say it is that that Mishnah wasn't obvious. Rav Huna came to explain the Mishnah, came to sort of explain all that information about how if he ate it for 3 years when the father was alive, so then certainly it would be a chazakah. If he wasn't there for 3 years, then it would not be a chazakah. Like Rav Huna is coming to give the details over here and sort of to prove what we're saying, which is that Davka is talking about a situation where he ate for 2 years while the father was alive, and a 3rd year after he was dead. Alternatively, afilu higdil kamash malon. The Chiddush of Rav Huna is that he's saying even once Shimon gets older, right? Meaning if when Shimon inherited the property from his father, he was a minor. Even when Shimon gets older, if Reuven is still on the field for another 3 years, still it makes no difference, since Shimon acquired the field when he was a minor. V'lukma kagon she'achla. Where am I? V'lesne b'didei. But still, for the Gemara is not convinced. Still, why do we have to say that it's talking about Shimon's father? Why can't we say that it's talking about Shimon himself? That Reuven saying, Shimon, this field belonged to you, but I bought it from you. Or witnesses come and say that the field belongs to Shimon. Reuven says, yeah, but I bought it from Shimon. Why can't we say it's talking about Shimon and leave out the father? V'lukma kigon sha'achla shtayim b'fanav v'achash lo b'fanav. And let's say that what's the Chiddush then with Reuven, right? Meaning if Reuven was on the field for 3 years, so of course he should be believed. If he wasn't there for 3 years, he should not be believed. Well, let's say the Chiddush is that he ate, we're only talking about Shimon. And witnesses come and say that the field belongs to Shimon. Now, Reuven had eaten from the field for 2 years when Shimon was around, but then the 3rd year that Reuven was eating from the field, Shimon was not around. Uchigon shebarach, and it's talking about that Shimon ran away. And the Chiddush is that even though Reuven was on the field for 3 years, we cannot believe him, since one of the years Shimon was not around. Now, Baruch Machmas Mai, why did Shimon run away in the first place? Either Baruch Machmas Nefashos, if Shimon ran away for some, because I guess his life was threatened. So pshita de lo mehemen. Well, then certainly Reuven would not be believed about his chazaka because Shimon had to run away. He was running for his life. Reuven can't take advantage of that situation to make a chazaka and take his field. De lo matzi machi, because Shimon wasn't able to protest. He was running for his life. V'debarach machbas mammon. And if Shimon ran away for some kind of monetary reason, well, ibayde lemachuye. Shimon should have nonetheless protested from a distance against Reuven and said, hey, if Reuven's on my field, forget it. He can't make a chazaka. It's not his, it's mine. But he didn't do that. The Kaimelon, as we learn macho shelo b'fonav havi macho, that a protest, even if it's not, in front of Reuven, meaning if Shimon would protest, even though it's not in front of Reuven, right? So if Reuven is on, right, has been already on Shimon's field for 2 years, now it's the third year, Shimon has to run away for whatever reason, financial reasons. Well, then Shimon should protest against Reuven and say, hey, if Reuven's going to try to make a 3-year chazaka, forget about it. It's not his, it's mine. The Tananis, we learn in the Mishnah, Shalosh Arotzus L'Chazaka. There are 3 sections of Eretz Yisrael when it comes to creating a chazaka, right, to being able to establish your presence on a piece of property. Yehuda ve'Var Yarden v'Galil, those 3 sections are the area of Judea, the area of the Galilee, and the other side of the Jordan River. Yehuda ve'Chzik v'Galil. If Shimon was in Yehuda and Reuven is making a chazaka in the Galil, v'Galil ve'Chzik b'Yehuda, or if Shimon was in the Galil and Reuven is making a chazaka in Yehuda, ain't a chazaka, it is not a proper chazaka. Ad she'imo b'Medina, they would have to be in the same area, right? In order for Reuven to be able to make a chazaka on the property, Shimon would have to be, in the same part of Eretz Yisrael that Reuven is, right? Either in Yehuda or the Galil, or they would both have to be in Eber Yardin. Vavinam, and we ask, my kasava, I don't understand this Mishnah. Kasava macho shelo b'fanav havi macho. If the author of this Mishnah holds that you can protest even not in front of him, right? That Shimon would be able to protest against Reuven being on his field, even not in the presence of Reuven. So afilu b'Yehuda v'Galil nami. Well, then even if Shimon is in Yehuda and Reuven's making a chazaka, trying to make a chazaka in the Galil, it should be a proper chazaka because Shimon should have protested. Ve'i kasav macha shelo b'fanav lo avi macha. And if we hold that a protest, that if Shimon protests not in front of Reuven, then it does not count. Well, then afilu Yehuda nami lo. Well, then even if Shimon is in Yehuda and Reuven is in Yehuda as well, well, then the chazaka should not count because Shimon was unable to protest because they weren't in the same place, even though they were both in Yehuda, but they weren't literally right in front of each other. So therefore, you should be unable to make a chazaka even within Yehuda, right? Meaning this Mishnah is saying that if Shimon is in Yehuda and Reuven is in the Galil, so then Reuven cannot make a chazaka. But if they're both in Yehuda or they're both in the Galil, so then Reuven would be able to make a chazaka. But I don't understand. If we say that a macha shelo b'fanav is a good macha, well then even if they're Shimon's in Yehuda and Reuven's in the Galil, so let Shimon protest. And if it is not a macha, so then even if they're both in Yehuda, so then he's unable to protest anyway. So why are we saying that it would be able to be a chazaka since Shimon would be unable to protest? So Amr Abba Bar Mama L'Olam Kasav Machosh Lo B'Fanav Havya Machosh. So really we hold that a macho, that if Shimon protests against Reuven's chazaka, even if he's not mamish in front of Reuven, it still counts. So if that's the case, so Masnisin B'Shas Cherum Shanu. However, our Mishnah, the reason why it's saying that it's not a chazaka is because it was talking about a situation where there was an emergency. It was a dangerous situation, and therefore it was difficult for communication to pass between different areas. And therefore, let's go weiter for a second. Yehuda v'Galil denakad, this time Yehuda v'Galil b'shas chayim damu. And the Mishnah Davka mentioned Yehuda and the Galil because these different sections of Eretz Yisrael have the default status of being like an emergency situation, a situation where word doesn't spread quickly. And therefore, even though technically speaking, a macha'a, right, Shimon can protest not in front of Reuven, that if Reuven's trying to establish a chazaka on Shimon's land, and Shimon says, hey, Reuven, don't do that, and don't listen to Reuven because it's my land, so, it would work even if Shimon protests not in front of Reuven. However, in different sections of Eretz Yisrael, such as Yehuda and Galil, it's assumed that it would be more difficult for communication to pass, and therefore we don't necessarily assume that they can that Shimon would be able to effectively protest, and therefore Reuven would be unable to effectively establish a chazakah, since Shimon would be unable to effectively protest. And therefore, that is why we'd be unable to say that we're talking about Shimon as opposed to Shimon's father, and just that, the chiddush is that, when witnesses come and say that the field belongs to Shimon, and Reuven says, no, I bought it from Shimon, he's not believed, and we would want to say that even though Reuven had been making a chazakah for 2 years in front of Shimon, but then Shimon ran away, and then Reuven made the third year of the chazakah not in front of him. But we say Shimon should have protested in that case, and in that case, actually it would be a proper chazakah, and the field should belong to Reuven, and therefore there isn't really much of a chiddush over there, and therefore it has to be talking about Shimon's father, where Reuven made a chazakah for 2 years while Shimon's father was alive, and for a third year after Shimon's father died, and it was in the possession of Shimon, who was a minor. Friends, that was Daf Yud Zayin of Masechta Ksubis. The first part of the Daf, we saw the machlokus between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about how do you dance, or really how do you address a kala at the wedding. So Beis Shammai says, well, you got to be honest. If she comes from a good family, so then you could say so, but if not, then you're not going to sort of make that up. Whereas Beis Hillel always says, Kala noevacha suda. And then we saw different things about, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai would wave a hados branch, and other people would juggle, and things like that. And then we got back to our sort of the Mishnah about Pesha also, or Pesha Hitir, explaining why we have to be talking about Shimon's father, and we can't be talking about Shimon himself. Friends, that was Daf Yud Zayin of Masechta Ksubis. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.